The hospital smell hit me first, that antiseptic mixture of bleach and floor polish that makes your stomach turn. I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and a nurse checking something on a monitor next to my bed. My throat felt like sandpaper, and when I tried to speak, only a croak came out. "Mr. Quinn, you're awake!" The nurse, a young woman with kind eyes, rushed to my side. "Don't try to talk yet. Let me get the doctor." My mind felt foggy, like I was pushing through cotton. The last thing I remembered was driving home to my lake house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. I'd bought that property 3 years ago, a beautiful 2-story Craftsman right on the water. My retirement dream. Then nothing. Just darkness. Dr. Patel arrived within minutes, shining lights in my eyes and asking me questions. "Mr. Quinn, I'm glad you're back with us. You were in a serious car accident. A drunk driver hit you head-on Highway 50. You've been in a coma for 6 months." 6 months. The words echoed in my head. Half a year of my life, gone. "Your brother has been notified," the nurse said gently. "He's your emergency contact." My brother Marcus lived in Chicago, about 2 hours away. We weren't particularly close, but he was all the family I had left since our parents passed. The next few days were a blur of physical therapy, cognitive tests, and doctors explaining everything I'd missed. My body felt weak, muscles atrophied from months of lying still. But my mind was clearing, and with it came a pressing need to know about my house, my bills, my life. Marcus showed up on the 3rd day after I woke up. He looked uncomfortable as he walked into my hospital room, not quite meeting my eyes. "Hey, Pete," he said, using the nickname I'd always hated. "Good to see you awake, man." "Marcus, thanks for coming. Listen, I need you to help me with some things. My house, my bills. I need to know what's been happening." He shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Yeah, about that. We should talk." Something in his tone made my blood run cold. "What happened?" "The HOA, Peter. They've been trying to reach you. Obviously couldn't. I got some letters forwarded to me as your emergency contact. They said you had violations, unpaid fees. I tried to handle it, but..." "But what?" I struggled to sit up straighter. "They said they were going to put a lien on the property. I didn't know what to do. I was dealing with your medical bills, the insurance companies. I couldn't be everywhere at once." I felt panic rising in my chest. "Where do things stand now?" Marcus looked at the floor. "I think you should call them. The HOA president, her name is Brenda Carmichael. She's been, persistent." 2 weeks later, I was finally discharged from the hospital. I'd made remarkable progress, the doctor said, though I still tired easily. Marcus drove me back to Lake Geneva, and the entire ride my stomach was in knots. I'd tried calling the HOA office multiple times, but Brenda Carmichael never answered, and no one returned my messages. As we turned down Lakeshore Drive, I strained to see my house. The beautiful cedar siding, the wraparound porch, the dock where I'd spent countless evenings watching the sunset. But as we got closer, my heart dropped into my shoes. There was a car in my driveway. Not my car, which had been totaled in the accident. A new BMW SUV, gleaming white in the afternoon sun. And on my porch, sitting in what used to be my rocking chair, was a woman I'd never seen before. "What the hell?" I said, and Marcus slowed the car. The woman stood up as we approached. She was probably in her 40s, blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, wearing expensive-looking yoga pants and a designer jacket. She watched us with her arms crossed. "Keep driving," she called out as Marcus pulled into the driveway. "This is private property." I practically fell out of the car. My legs were still weak, but adrenaline pushed me forward. "This is my property. Who are you and what are you doing in my house?" The woman's face twisted into an expression of disdain. "Your house? I don't think so. I'm Sharon Mitchell, and I purchased this property 3 months ago through a legal HOA foreclosure sale. I have the deed and everything, so actually, you're trespassing." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "That's impossible. This is my house. I've been in a coma. I couldn't..." "Not my problem," Sharon said coldly. "The HOA followed all proper procedures. Notifications were sent, deadlines were posted. You failed to respond, failed to pay your dues, and your property was sold to cover the debt. Now get off my porch before I call the police." Marcus grabbed my arm. "Peter, let's go. We need to figure this out properly." But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stared at this woman standing in front of my house, my home, telling me I had no right to be there. I want to see this deed. I want to see the paperwork. I don't have to show you anything, Sharon snapped, but if you must know, everything is on file with the county and the HOA office. Take it up with them. Now leave or I'm calling 911. She pulled out her phone, and I saw she wasn't bluffing. Marcus pulled me back to the car, and I let him because I didn't know what else to do. My mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. We drove to a small motel in town, and Marcus helped me check in. I sat on the edge of the cheap mattress, staring at nothing. "I'll call a lawyer," Marcus said. "This has to be illegal. You were in a coma, for God's sake." "The deed," I said quietly. She mentioned a deed. "But Marcus, I have the deed. The original deed to my property. It's in my safety deposit box at First National Bank." Marcus looked at me with something like hope. "Then we fight this. First thing tomorrow, we get that deed. We get a lawyer, and we figure out how the hell the HOA thought they could sell your house out from under you." That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman on my porch, dismissing me like I was nothing. I thought about all my belongings inside that house, my clothes, my furniture, my photographs, my father's watch, my mother's china, everything I owned in the world. The next morning, we went straight to the bank. The manager, a man named Tom Stevenson, who I'd known slightly before the accident, looked shocked to see me. "Peter Quinn. My God, we heard about your accident. We thought, well, frankly, we didn't know if you'd make it. It's good to see you up and around." "Tom, I need to access my safety deposit box. It's urgent." He nodded and led us to the vault. My hands shook as I turned the key, and Marcus had to help me lift out the long metal box. Inside were all my important documents, my birth certificate, my passport, my will, and yes, the deed to my house at 1847 Lakeshore Drive. I pulled it out, unfolding the heavy paper carefully. There it was, clear as day. My name, Peter William Quinn, as the sole owner of the property, dated 3 years ago when I'd bought the place, properly notarized and recorded with Walworth County. "Got it," I said, relief flooding through me. "Now let's find a lawyer." Marcus had done research the night before and found a real estate attorney in town named David Fisher. His office was able to see us that afternoon, and I brought every document I had. David Fisher was in his 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he sat back in his chair. "This is problematic on multiple levels," he said carefully. "First, let's talk about HOA foreclosures. They are legal in Wisconsin, but there are very specific procedures that must be followed. The HOA has to provide notice, usually multiple notices, before they can place a lien on your property. Then, they have to go through the court system to foreclose." "I was in a coma," I said. "I couldn't respond to any notices." "That's where this gets interesting," David said. "There are protections under the Service Members Civil Relief Act for people who are incapacitated and unable to respond to legal proceedings. While that primarily applies to military members, the principle has been extended in some cases to people who are medically incapacitated. We'll need to research Wisconsin case law." "What about the deed?" I pushed the document across his desk. "I have the original deed. How can they sell property I own?" David examined the deed carefully. "This is a valid deed, properly recorded. However, if the HOA placed a lien on the property and foreclosed, they could potentially sell it to satisfy that debt. But here's the thing, you'd still own the property subject to that lien. For them to sell it outright, they would have needed a court order, and they would have been required to provide you with proper notice." "I never got any notice," I said. "I was unconscious." "Then we have grounds to challenge the sale. But first, I need to see all the paperwork the HOA has. I need to see proof that they followed proper procedure. Do you know who the HOA president is?" "Brenda Carmichael," I said, the name bitter in my mouth. "Right. And the woman who claims she bought your house?" "Sharon Mitchell." David made notes. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to file an emergency motion with the circuit court to stop any further action regarding the property until we can sort this out." I'm also going to send demand letters to both the HOA and Ms. Mitchell, requiring them to produce all documents related to the foreclosure and sale. And I'm going to file a lawsuit challenging the validity of the sale based on improper notice and your incapacitation. How long will this take? I asked. Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months. In the meantime, you obviously can't live in the house. Do you have somewhere to stay? The motel, I said. I don't have anywhere else. David frowned. That's going to get expensive. Let me see what I can do. Over the next week, David Fisher moved fast. He filed all the necessary paperwork, and I had to sign what felt like 100 documents. The emergency motion was granted, which meant Sharon Mitchell couldn't make any permanent changes to the property while the case was pending. It was a small victory, but I'd take it. The demand letters went out, and that's when things got ugly. I got a call from David's office asking me to come in immediately. When I arrived, his secretary looked nervous, and David himself looked angry. They're refusing to produce the documents, he said flatly. Brenda Carmichael sent back a letter through the HOA's lawyer saying that all proper procedures were followed, and they have no obligation to provide us with anything. They claim it's all in the public record. Is it? Some of it. I sent my paralegal to the courthouse and the county recorder's office. Here's what we found. He spread papers across his desk. The HOA did file a lien against your property for unpaid dues. According to their records, you owed approximately $6,000, 6 months of HOA dues at $900 per month, plus late fees and interest. I nearly choked. $900 a month? When I bought the house, the dues were $300. David raised an eyebrow. According to the HOA bylaws, they voted to increase the dues 18 months ago. It was supposedly announced at a community meeting and sent out in a newsletter. I never got any newsletter, and I never went to any meeting about increasing the dues by 3 times. That's going to be an issue, but not our main one right now. The bigger problem is what happened next. The HOA filed for foreclosure. But here's what's strange. There's no record of a court hearing. In Wisconsin, a foreclosure has to go through judicial process. There has to be a hearing where a judge signs off on it, but I can't find any record of that. My heart started pounding. What does that mean? It means the foreclosure might be completely invalid, but here's where it gets even weirder. The deed that was filed with the county, showing Sharon Mitchell as the new owner, is dated 3 months ago, but the notary stamp on it is from a notary whose license expired 2 years ago. So it's a fake? Possibly, or at least improperly executed. Peter, I think we might be looking at fraud here, and if that's the case, this isn't just a civil matter anymore. The word fraud hung in the air between us. What do we do? I'm going to contact the district attorney's office. If the HOA and this Mitchell woman conspired to fraudulently take your property, that's criminal. In the meantime, I'm filing an amended complaint alleging fraud and seeking immediate return of your property. Things moved quickly after that. The district attorney, a serious woman named Rebecca Walsh, agreed to meet with us. I told my story again, showed her the deed, showed her the documentation of my coma. She listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and then asked David for copies of everything he'd found. I'll need to investigate, she said. If there's criminal activity here, we'll pursue it. But I have to warn you, Mr. Quinn, these cases can be complicated. The HOA will claim they followed proper procedures, and it will be your word against theirs. I was in a coma, I said. I have medical records. How could I have been properly notified of anything? That's a strong point, she admitted. Let me dig into this. I'll be in touch. 2 weeks later, I got a call asking me to come back to the DA's office. Rebecca Walsh looked grim as she gestured for David and me to sit. I've been investigating, and I don't like what I've found. The HOA foreclosure sale was never properly filed with the court. There was no hearing, no judge's signature, nothing. The HOA just filed a deed claiming they'd foreclosed and sold the property. That alone is potentially fraudulent. Potentially? I said. The HOA's lawyer is claiming it was an administrative error, that they thought they'd followed the right procedures. But here's what's really interesting. I pulled the financial records for the HOA. They've been having serious money problems. They're nearly bankrupt. And I found out that Sharon Mitchell paid well below market value for your house. Your property is worth at least $400,000. She paid $80,000. I felt sick. They sold my house for $80,000? to cover your supposed $6,000 debt, plus their legal fees and administrative costs, except those costs seem to have been wildly inflated. And here's the kicker: Brenda Carmichael, the HOA president, and Sharon Mitchell are friends. They're in the same yoga class, they vacation together. I found photos on social media. So this was planned, David said. They targeted Peter's property when he was vulnerable. Rebecca nodded. That's what it looks like. And there's more. I found out this isn't the first time. The HOA foreclosed on 2 other properties in the last year. Both homeowners who were elderly and confused about the increased dues. Both properties were sold for well below market value, and in both cases, the buyers had connections to either Brenda Carmichael or other HOA board members. This is a criminal conspiracy, David said. I believe so. I'm opening a formal investigation. I'll need your full cooperation, Mr. Quinn, and I have to warn you, this is going to get messy. The HOA will fight back hard. She wasn't kidding. Within days of the DA's announcement that she was investigating, I started getting threatening letters. The HOA's lawyer sent me a cease and desist, claiming I was harassing their members. Brenda Carmichael herself sent me a letter accusing me of slander and threatening to sue me for defamation. But I also started hearing from other homeowners in the community. People I'd barely known before the accident reached out to tell me their own stories. There were complaints about arbitrary fines, about the HOA board making decisions without proper votes, about dues being raised without proper notice. A pattern was emerging, and it was ugly. One woman, an elderly widow named Patricia, told me the HOA had tried to foreclose on her house after her husband died. They'd claimed she owed back dues, but she had canceled checks proving she'd paid everything. It was only when her son, a lawyer in Milwaukee, threatened to sue that the HOA backed off. Another homeowner, a man named Robert Chen, told me the HOA had fined him $10,000 for painting his house the wrong shade of blue. He'd used the exact color specified in the HOA guidelines, but Brenda claimed it was too dark. He'd eventually paid the fine just to make the harassment stop. The more I heard, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about a corrupt HOA board that had been abusing their power and victimizing homeowners for years. David filed our amended lawsuit, and the court date was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Sharon Mitchell filed a countersuit claiming that I was the one harassing her, and that she was a good faith buyer who'd done nothing wrong. Her lawyer painted her as an innocent victim who'd simply bought a property at a foreclosure sale. I spent those 6 weeks gathering evidence, talking to homeowners, and working with the DA's office. Rebecca Walsh's investigators were thorough, pulling financial records, interviewing board members, and building their case. I gave a deposition that lasted 8 hours, going through every detail of my purchase of the house, my accident, my coma, and everything that had happened since I woke up. Marcus came up from Chicago a few times to support me, though I could tell he was stressed. He kept suggesting I just take a settlement if one was offered, get some money, and walk away. But I couldn't do that. This was my home, my dream. And more than that, it was about principle. They couldn't just steal someone's house because they were vulnerable. The week before the court hearing, David called me with news. Sharon Mitchell's lawyer reached out. They want to settle. What are they offering? They'll deed the house back to you, drop their countersuit, and pay your legal fees. In exchange, you agree not to pursue any claims against Sharon personally. I thought about it. What about Brenda and the HOA? The settlement wouldn't affect the criminal investigation or any claims against the HOA. It's just about Sharon. Why would she agree to this? My guess? She's realizing she's in over her head. If the DA proves this was a conspiracy, she could face criminal charges. This way, she gets out with minimal damage. What do you think I should do? David leaned back in his chair. Honestly, I think you should take it. You get your house back, which is what you wanted, and the DA can still go after the HOA for the fraud. If you reject this and go to trial, there's always a risk. Judges can be unpredictable. I thought about it for 2 days. Finally, I agreed. We signed the settlement papers, and just like that, my house was mine again. Sharon Mitchell moved out within a week, though I heard through the grapevine that she was furious with Brenda for getting her involved in this mess. When I finally walked back into my house, It felt surreal. Most of my belongings were still there, though Sharon had added her own furniture and decorations. I spent a week just cleaning and putting things back the way they were, finding my father's watch where I'd left it in my dresser drawer, my mother's china still in the cabinet. But the fight wasn't over. The criminal investigation continued, and I was called as a witness before a grand jury. I told my story under oath, presented my evidence, and answered questions from the prosecutors. 2 weeks later, the grand jury returned indictments. Brenda Carmichael was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and theft by deception. 2 other HOA board members, who'd apparently been in on the scheme, were also indicted. The charges were serious, with potential prison time if they were convicted. The day the indictments were announced, I got a call from Brenda herself. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Peter, please, this is all a misunderstanding. We can work this out. Drop the charges and I'll pay you whatever you want." "I can't drop the charges, Brenda. The DA is prosecuting this, not me. And even if I could, I wouldn't. You tried to steal my house. You've been stealing from homeowners for years." "It wasn't stealing. We were trying to keep the community solvent. The dues weren't covering our costs, and properties in foreclosure bring down everyone's values. We were doing what was best for the neighborhood." "By fraudulently foreclosing on people's homes and selling them to your friends for pennies on the dollar? That's not managing a community, Brenda. That's theft." She started crying. "I could go to prison. I have grandchildren. Please." I felt a momentary twinge of pity, but then I remembered Patricia, the widow who'd nearly lost her home. I remembered Robert Chen, extorted for thousands over paint color. I remembered myself, waking up from a coma to find my life destroyed. "You should have thought about that before you decided to abuse your power," I said, and hung up. The trial started 3 months later. I was called as the prosecution's first witness. The courtroom was packed with homeowners from the community, people who'd been victimized or who'd witnessed the HOA's corruption. I took the stand and told my story again, walking the jury through everything that had happened. The defense lawyers tried to shake me on cross-examination, suggesting that I'd actually been notified of the foreclosure proceedings, but didn't remember due to my coma. They tried to claim that the HOA had followed proper procedures and that any errors were innocent mistakes. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution presented the financial records showing the HOA's bankruptcy and the below-market sales. They showed the social media photos proving the connection between Brenda and Sharon. They brought in handwriting experts who testified that signatures on some of the foreclosure documents had been forged. They brought in the notary whose license had expired, who testified that she'd never notarized any deed for Sharon Mitchell. The other homeowners testified too. Patricia told her story. Robert Chen told his. One by one, a picture emerged of an HOA board that had been systematically abusing their power and defrauding homeowners for years. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Brenda Carmichael collapsed in the courtroom when the verdict was read. The 2 other board members sat stone-faced. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks out. I sat in the gallery and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Finally, it was over. At the sentencing hearing, the judge was harsh. He called the defendants' actions a betrayal of trust and predatory behavior against vulnerable homeowners. Brenda Carmichael was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The other board members got 18 months each. There were also orders for restitution. They had to pay back all the money they'd fraudulently taken from homeowners. After the sentencing, reporters wanted to talk to me. I gave a brief statement thanking the DA's office and encouraging other homeowners in similar situations to come forward. Then, I went home to my real home and sat on my porch, looking out at the lake. The water was calm that evening, reflecting the sunset in shades of orange and pink. I thought about everything that had happened, about how close I'd come to losing it all. But I'd fought back. I'd stood up for what was right. And in the end, justice had prevailed. Marcus called that night. "I saw the news. Congratulations, Peter. You did it." "We did it," I said. "I couldn't have done it without your help at the beginning." "So what now?" "Now I live my life," I said. "I enjoy my house. I recover from the accident. I maybe find a lawyer to help us disband this HOA and form a new one with proper oversight and accountability." "Sounds like a plan. You going to be okay up there by yourself?" Yeah, I said, and realized I meant it. I'm going to be fine. Over the next few months, life slowly returned to normal. I continued physical therapy and regained most of my strength. The community held a vote and disbanded the old HOA, forming a new one with strict bylaws and financial oversight. I was asked to serve on the new board, but I declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics for a lifetime. Sharon Mitchell left town, and I heard she'd moved to Arizona to live with her sister. The house she'd been living in before she tried to buy mine went on the market. I hoped wherever she ended up, she'd learned her lesson about getting involved in shady real estate deals. The other homeowners who'd been victimized started getting their restitution payments. Patricia used hers to make repairs on her house that she'd been putting off. Robert Chen used his to start a neighborhood watch program to prevent anything like this from happening again. I used some of the restitution I received compensation for, emotional distress and the loss of use of my property to renovate my dock. I bought a small boat, nothing fancy, just something to take out on the lake in the mornings. I started having coffee on the porch every day, watching the sun come up over the water. One morning, about a year after I'd woken up from the coma, I was sitting on that porch when a car pulled up. An older couple got out, looking around at the neighborhood. They walked up to my house hesitantly. "Excuse me," the man said. "We're thinking about buying a house here in the community. We heard there were some problems with the HOA in the past. Is this a good place to live?" I thought about how to answer that. I could tell them about Brenda Carmichael and the corruption and the fraud trial. I could scare them off with horror stories. Or I could tell them the truth. "It's a great place to live," I said. "We had some problems, but we dealt with them. The new HOA is transparent and accountable. The neighbors are good people, and the view can't be beat." I gestured at the lake, sparkling in the morning sun. The couple smiled. "That's good to hear. We're retiring, and we want somewhere peaceful." "Then this might be the place for you," I said. They thanked me and walked back to their car. I watched them drive slowly down Lakeshore Drive, looking at the houses, imagining their future here. I hoped they'd buy something in the neighborhood. We could use more good people, people who'd help keep the community strong and honest. I thought about everything I'd been through: the accident, the coma, waking up to find my life turned upside down, the fight to get my home back, the trial, the victory. It had been the hardest year of my life, but I'd come out the other side stronger. My phone rang. It was David Fisher, my lawyer. "Peter, I wanted to give you a heads up. The state legislature is considering a new law based on your case. It would require HOAs to get court approval before foreclosing on any property, and it would create stricter oversight of HOA finances. They're calling it the Homeowner Protection Act." I felt a surge of pride. "That's fantastic, David. If my case can help prevent this from happening to someone else, then it was all worth it. You should testify at the committee hearing. Your story is powerful." "I'll do it," I said without hesitation. A month later, I drove down to Madison and testified before a state legislative committee. I told my story again, but this time it felt different. This time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every homeowner who'd ever been victimized by a corrupt HOA, and for everyone who might be victimized in the future. The legislators listened carefully, asked good questions, and thanked me for my testimony. 6 months later, the Homeowner Protection Act passed both houses and was signed into law by the governor. David called me the day it happened, and we celebrated over the phone. Life settled into a comfortable routine after that. I started dating a woman I met at a local coffee shop, a teacher named Annie Ashford, who was kind and funny and didn't judge me for the limp I still had from the accident. We took things slow, but I could see a future there, maybe. I reconnected with some old friends from before the accident, guys I'd lost touch with during my recovery. We started having poker nights at my house once a month, sitting on the porch when the weather was nice, telling stories and laughing. Marcus visited more often, and our relationship got better. He admitted he'd felt guilty about not doing more when the HOA came after my house, and I told him I didn't blame him. He'd done his best in an impossible situation. We were family, and that was what mattered. 2 years after waking up from the coma, I was sitting on my dock on a warm summer evening. Annie was there, and Marcus and his wife had driven up for the weekend. We were grilling burgers and watching the boats go by. Someone made a joke, and everyone laughed, and I thought about how normal this was, how peaceful. "You okay?" Annie asked, noticing me staring out at the water. "Yeah," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I'm better than okay." She squeezed my hand and I squeezed back. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and my house, my home, the place I'd fought so hard for, stood solid behind me. I'd been through hell and come out the other side. I'd faced down corruption and won. I'd lost 6 months of my life to a coma and another year to fighting for what was mine. But I'd never given up. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee. I took my mug out to the porch and sat in my rocking chair, the same chair Sharon Mitchell had sat in when she told me this wasn't my house. The memory still stung a little, but it was distant now, less sharp. A neighbor walked by with their dog and waved. "Morning, Peter?" "Morning," I called back. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos. There was one from the day I'd first bought this house 3 years ago, standing in front of it with the biggest grin on my face. I'd been so excited, so full of plans for my retirement. Then there were photos from the hospital, looking gaunt and weak. Photos from the courthouse on the day of the verdict. Photos from the dock renovation. Photos with Annie. My life had been derailed, but I'd gotten it back on track. The scars were still there, physical and emotional, but they were healing. I was healing. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Annie coming out onto the porch, wrapped in one of my sweatshirts, her hair messy from sleep. "Morning," she said, leaning down to kiss the top of my head. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." "Good thoughts or bad thoughts?" "Good ones, actually. Just thinking about how far I've come. How lucky I am." She sat down in the chair next to mine. "You're not lucky, Peter. You're strong. You fought for what was yours, and you won. That's not luck. That's perseverance." Maybe she was right. I'd certainly had to persevere through the coma, through the physical therapy, through the legal battles, through all of it. But I'd made it. I was here, in my home, with people I cared about, living the life I'd dreamed of. The lake stretched out before us, calm and beautiful in the early morning light. Somewhere out there, fish were jumping, birds were singing in the trees. The world was waking up, and I was waking up with it. "What do you want to do today?" Annie asked. "I don't know. Maybe take the boat out, do some fishing." Sounds perfect. And it did. It really did. After everything I'd been through, after all the chaos and the fighting and the fear, I'd finally found peace. Not just peace in my surroundings, but peace within myself. I'd learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could face injustice and fight back, that I could lose everything and still rebuild. The real deed, the one I'd pulled out of my safety deposit box that day, the one that had proved the HOA's fraud, was back in the vault now. But I didn't need it anymore. Everyone knew this was my house. There was no question, no dispute. It was mine. Bought and paid for, fought for, and won. Later that morning, Marcus and his wife left to drive back to Chicago. Annie and I did go out on the boat, and I caught a decent-sized bass that we grilled for dinner. We ate on the porch as the sun set, talking about nothing and everything, just enjoying being together. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I walked through my house, running my hand along the walls. Every room held memories now, not just the good memories from before the accident, but the new memories I was making. This house wasn't just a structure anymore. It was home in every sense of the word. I thought about Brenda Carmichael, serving her sentence in prison. Part of me felt bad for her. 3 years was a long time, and she'd lost everything. Her reputation, her freedom, her standing in the community. But then I remembered what she'd tried to do, not just to me, but to so many others. She'd abused a position of trust and power. She deserved to face the consequences. I thought about Sharon Mitchell, too, starting over in Arizona. I hoped she'd learn from this experience, that she'd be more careful about the deals she got involved in. I held no ill will toward her anymore. She'd been greedy and foolish, but she'd ultimately done the right thing by settling and giving me back my house. And I thought about myself, about Peter William Quinn, the man who'd woken up from a coma to find his worst nightmare had come true, and who'd fought his way back. I was proud of that man, proud of what I'd accomplished, proud of the stand I'd taken. The next day brought more normalcy. I did some yard work, catching up on maintenance that had been neglected during the whole ordeal. I mowed the lawn, trimmed the hedges, and cleaned out the gutters. Simple tasks that gave me satisfaction, that made the house feel even more like mine. Neighbors stopped by throughout the day to chat. Everyone knew my story by now, and I'd become something of a local celebrity. People asked for advice about dealing with the new HOA, about property rights, about legal issues. I helped where I could, always careful not to overstep since I wasn't a lawyer myself. That afternoon, I got a call from Rebecca Walsh, the district attorney who'd prosecuted the case. "Peter, I wanted to let you know that we've recovered most of the money from the HOA's accounts. Brenda and the others had hidden some assets, but our investigators tracked them down. Every homeowner who was victimized is going to get full restitution, plus interest." "That's wonderful news, Rebecca. Thank you for everything you did." "Thank you for coming forward. Cases like this can be hard to prove, but your evidence and testimony were crucial. You helped us put away some bad people and hopefully prevented future fraud." After we hung up, I sat on the porch and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been served thoroughly. The criminals were in prison, the victims were being compensated, and reforms had been put in place to prevent it from happening again. It was as close to a perfect ending as you could get in the real world. Over the following weeks and months, I watched as the community transformed. The new HOA was run by volunteers who actually cared about the neighborhood, not about lining their pockets. Dues were reasonable and clearly justified. Decisions were made transparently, with input from all the homeowners. It was what an HOA should be, a way for neighbors to work together to maintain and improve their community, not a weapon to be used against vulnerable people. I continued to heal, both physically and emotionally. The limp from the accident became less pronounced. The nightmares about losing my house faded. I started to feel like myself again, the person I'd been before the drunk driver had crashed into me on Highway 50. Annie and I grew closer. She moved in unofficially at first, spending more nights at my place than her apartment, until one day I just asked her to make it permanent. She said yes, and we celebrated by having a small party with friends and neighbors. It felt good to have the house full of laughter and life again. I started volunteering at a local organization that helped people understand their rights as homeowners. I figured I had some expertise now, hard-won as it was. I worked with people fighting unjust HOA fines, people confused about foreclosure notices, people who just needed someone to listen and tell them they weren't alone. Every person I helped felt like a small victory, like I was paying forward the help I'd received from David Fisher and Rebecca Walsh and all the others who'd fought for me. I couldn't practice law, but I could share my story and my knowledge. I could be a voice for people who felt powerless against bureaucracy and corruption. One day, almost 3 years after waking up from the coma, I received a letter from Brenda Carmichael. It had been forwarded from the prison where she was serving her sentence. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, and I could see where tears had smudged some of the ink. She apologized, not the self-serving apology from when she'd called trying to get me to drop the charges, but what seemed like a genuine expression of remorse. She wrote about how she'd gotten caught up in keeping up appearances, in trying to maintain a certain lifestyle, and how it had led her down a terrible path. She said she deserved her punishment and hoped that when she got out, she could somehow make amends. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to forgive her, might never be ready, but I appreciated the apology. It showed she was at least trying to take responsibility for what she'd done. Life continued its steady rhythm. Annie and I talked about marriage, and while we hadn't set a date yet, I knew it was in our future. Marcus and I grew even closer, talking on the phone weekly, visiting each other regularly. My health continued to improve until I felt almost as strong as I had before the accident. The lake house, my beautiful home on Lakeshore Drive, remained my sanctuary. Every morning I'd have coffee on the porch. Every evening I'd watch the sunset over the water. I never took it for granted, not after coming so close to losing it. This wasn't just property. It was my peace of mind, my security, my future. Sometimes people would ask me if I regretted buying a house in an HOA community, given everything that had happened. I'd tell them, no, I didn't regret it. What happened could have happened anywhere. Corruption wasn't unique to HOAs, it was a human problem. And besides, we'd fixed it. The new HOA was proof that the system could work when good people were in charge. What I'd learned through this whole ordeal was that you can't give up, even when things seem hopeless. When I woke up from that coma and found out the HOA had sold my house, I could have just walked away. I could have taken whatever settlement I could get and started over somewhere else. A lot of people would have. It would have been easier. But I didn't, because this house mattered. Because principle mattered. Because letting corrupt people get away with victimizing the vulnerable wasn't something I could live with. So I fought, and I won, and I helped change the system so others would have better protection. That was worth more than the house itself, though getting to keep my home was pretty damn good too. Annie came out onto the porch where I was sitting, thinking about all of this. "What are you brooding about?" she asked with a smile. "Not brooding, just reflecting." "On what?" "On how lucky I am, on how good life is, on how glad I am that I'm here to enjoy it." She sat down next to me and took my hand. "I'm glad you're here too." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the lake. A boat went by, trailing a wake that sparkled in the sunlight. Somewhere a dog barked. The sound of children playing drifted from a neighbor's yard. Normal sounds, beautiful sounds. My phone buzzed with a text from David Fisher. The Homeowner Protection Act had just been used successfully. In its first case, a family in Madison had been able to stop an unjust HOA foreclosure because of the new protections in the law. David thought I'd want to know. I texted back my thanks and sat back in my chair, a smile spreading across my face. Another family saved, another home protected. The ripples from my case were spreading, helping people I'd never meet, preventing tragedies I'd never know about. That evening, I grilled steaks on the porch while Annie made a salad. We ate watching the sunset, as we did most nights. The sky turned orange, then pink, then purple as the sun sank below the horizon. Stars began to appear, and the lake went from blue to black, reflecting the moon. "Perfect day," Annie said softly. "Perfect day," I agreed. And it was. Not because anything extraordinary had happened, but because I was here to experience it. Because I'd fought for my right to be here, in this place, living this life. Because I'd refused to let corruption and greed take away what was mine. The real deed, the document that had saved me, was still in my safety deposit box at the bank. I didn't need to look at it anymore. I knew what it said. I knew what it meant. It meant this was my home, legally and morally and in every way that mattered. But more than that, I'd earned this home through my struggle to keep it. Every board, every nail, every shingle meant more to me now than when I'd first bought the place. This wasn't just a house I'd purchased. This was a home I'd fought for, suffered for, won. This was mine in a way that went beyond any legal document. As the stars came out and the night grew cool, Annie and I went inside. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom I'd thought I'd never see again. I got into bed, and Annie curled up next to me, and I felt contentment wash over me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to experience. But tonight, I was home. I was safe. I was surrounded by love and peace and everything good in the world. I'd woken up from a coma to find my worst nightmare had come true, but I'd pulled out the real deed, fought back against corruption, and won. Not just my house, but my life, my future, my peace of mind. And that victory, that knowledge that I could face the worst and overcome it, was sweeter than anything I could have imagined. As I drifted off to sleep, my last thought was simple and profound. I'd made it. Through everything, through the darkness and the fear and the uncertainty, I'd made it. And tomorrow I'd wake up in my own bed, in my own house, ready to face whatever came next. Because I'd learned something important through all of this. I'd learned that I was stronger than I knew. That justice, though sometimes slow, was real. That good people would stand up and help when you needed them. And that a home wasn't just about walls and a roof. It was about fighting for what mattered, standing up for what was right, and never, ever giving up. The lake whispered against the shore outside my window, a sound I'd missed during those months in the hospital, a sound I'd feared I'd never hear again from this house. But here I was, listening to it, living it, grateful for every moment. My story had started with tragedy, a car accident, a coma, a stolen home. But it ended with triumph, with justice served and wrongs righted, with a future stretched out before me, full of possibility, with love and peace and a deep, abiding satisfaction that I'd done the right thing, no matter how hard it had been. I woke up from a coma to find the HOA had sold my home, but I pulled out the real deed, and I got it back. More than that, I'd made sure it couldn't happen to anyone else, and that in the end made everything worth it.